gunshot came before anyone realized the flight had become a nightmare. A deafening crack exploded through the luxurious cabin as a bullet ripped through the reinforced cockpit door, leaving passengers frozen in stunned silence. Crystal glasses shattered against polished wood tables. Business contracts worth billions fluttered through the air like frightened birds. Then the jet suddenly dropped. Screams echoed from every corner of the cabin. At 35,000 feet, everyone understood the terrifying truth. This wasn't turbulence. Someone had taken control of the aircraft. 3 masked hijackers moved with frightening precision. One stormed into the cockpit. Another stood in the center aisle, pointing a rifle from row to row. The third collected every phone, laptop, and satellite device within reach. No heroes, no sudden movements. Do exactly what you're told. His voice carried no anger, only certainty. At the front of the cabin sat Eleanor Whitfield, founder and CEO of Langford Technologies. Less than an hour earlier, she had been rehearsing a presentation that would finalize the largest merger in her company's history. Now the papers meant nothing. She slowly raised her hands like everyone else. Around her, billionaires, attorneys, investors, and board members stared at one another with faces drained of color. One elderly investor whispered a prayer. Another executive quietly wiped tears from his eyes. Money, influence, and power had disappeared in an instant. Near the back of the aircraft sat a passenger almost no one had noticed since boarding. His name was Marcus Reilly, a widowed single father traveling home with his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. She slept peacefully against his shoulder beneath a small blue blanket, hugging a stuffed elephant worn soft from years of love. Marcus carefully adjusted the blanket so she wouldn't wake. He never looked away from the cabin. His breathing stayed slow, steady, controlled. A frightened passenger across the aisle stared at him. "How are you not panicking?" Marcus answered quietly. "Because she needs to believe her dad isn't afraid." The man looked at Emma, then back at Marcus. He nodded silently. Those simple words somehow eased his own fear. A flight attendant crawled carefully along the aisle, checking whether anyone had been injured when the aircraft dropped. Her hands shook so badly she could barely speak. Marcus leaned toward her. "Take one slow breath." She looked at him, then another. "If you stay calm, they'll stay calmer too." She followed his advice. Within seconds, her breathing steadied. Without realizing it, nearby passengers copied her. Even Eleanor noticed leadership wasn't always loud. Sometimes it sounded like a whisper. The hijackers continued shouting orders. Marcus continued watching, not staring at the weapons, watching the people holding them, their footsteps, their timing, the way they communicated with brief glances instead of words. Something didn't fit. These men were organized, but they weren't relaxed, almost as though something had already gone wrong. Then the aircraft rolled sharply to the right. Passengers screamed again. Coffee splashed across expensive suits. Several overhead compartments burst open, sending briefcases crashing into the aisle. Even the armed men struggled to keep their balance. The tallest hijacker pounded furiously on the cockpit door. What happened? No answer. He struck it again. Still nothing. For the first time, fear appeared in his eyes. Marcus saw it immediately. Eleanor saw Marcus notice it. She quietly leaned across the aisle. "You've been watching them since this started." He nodded slightly. "They're losing control." "How can you tell?" "They've stopped giving orders. They're asking questions." Before Eleanor could respond, the cockpit door flew open. One of the masked men stumbled backward, breathing hard. The captain collapsed. The words hit the cabin harder than the gunshot. Every hijacker stared at him. What about the co-pilot? He was hit when the door exploded. Silence. Real silence. Not fear. Shock. The aircraft suddenly pitched downward again, harder than before. Warning alarms echoed from somewhere beyond the cockpit. Several passengers cried openly. One executive clutched the armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. Marcus slowly closed his eyes for one brief second. When he opened them again, every trace of hesitation had disappeared. He kissed Emma gently on the forehead without waking her. Then he stood. The nearest hijacker immediately pointed his rifle toward him. "I told everyone to stay seated." Marcus looked directly into his eyes. His voice remained calm enough to silence the terrified cabin. "If you want anyone on this aircraft to see the ground alive, you need to get me into that cockpit right now." Every passenger turned toward the quiet single father. For the first time since the nightmare began, they weren't looking at the hijackers. They were looking at the man who sounded like he already knew how to save them. Every eye followed Marcus as he stepped into the aisle. The hijacker tightened his grip on the rifle. "You've got 10 seconds to explain why I shouldn't shoot you." Marcus never raised his voice. "Because your mission doesn't matter if this aircraft crashes. Your captain is unconscious. Your co-pilot is bleeding. And the autopilot just disconnected. In less than 3 minutes, none of us will survive." The leader hesitated. The warning alarm screaming from the cockpit confirmed every word. "Let him through," one of the other hijackers shouted. "We're losing altitude." Marcus turned toward Emma. She was awake now, tears filling her eyes. "Daddy." He knelt beside her and gently held her face. "Remember what we always say before every trip." She nodded. "You always come back." He smiled. "And today won't be any different." He handed her the small silver necklace her late late mother had given him years earlier. "Keep this safe until I return." Emma hugged him tightly before letting go. Marcus disappeared into the cockpit. Inside, chaos had taken over. The captain had suffered a massive medical emergency, while the injured co-pilot struggled to remain conscious. Multiple warning lights flashed across the instrument panel as the jet continued descending toward a mountain range hidden beneath heavy clouds. Without wasting a second, Marcus slid into the left seat. His hands moved confidently across the controls. Years earlier, before becoming a construction supervisor and a single father, he had spent 12 years as an Air Force rescue pilot flying emergency missions in some of the world's most dangerous conditions. He had never told anyone on this flight. He never imagined he would need those skills again. "Mayday, Mayday," Marcus transmitted calmly. "This is Langford 1. Pilot incapacitated. Request immediate vectors to the nearest suitable runway." Air traffic control answered instantly. "We have you on radar. Stay with us." Marcus followed every instruction with remarkable precision. Outside, storm clouds battered the aircraft, but the violent shaking slowly eased as he stabilized the jet. Minutes later, the runway finally appeared through the rain. Passengers held their breath. The tires struck the pavement with a heavy thud, then another. The aircraft slowed. Finally, it stopped. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then, applause erupted throughout the cabin. Some passengers cried openly. Others embraced complete strangers. As police arrested the hijackers, Eleanor approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. "You saved every life on this airplane." Marcus looked toward Emma, who was already running into his arms. "I only did what any father hopes he'll never have to do." Months later, Eleanor established a scholarship for the children of first responders and veterans, naming Marcus its first director. He accepted on one condition: that the program honor quiet acts of courage, not fame, because that unforgettable flight proved something every passenger carried home in their hearts. The greatest heroes rarely announce who they are. They simply step forward when everyone else runs out of hope. If this story reminded you that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, subscribe today because the next story may change the way you see a hero forever.